excited to host our local author and West Branch Library patron, Susanne Althoff, in conversation with Rachel Raczka about her new book, Launching While Female, Smashing the System That Holds Women Entrepreneurs Back. I want to introduce you to Rachel. She's a freelance journalist in Boston. She writes and edits for the Boston Globe and is a narrative consultant for first-time fiction authors and early-stage startup founders. And she also teaches magazine writing at Emerson College. And she's going to be talking with Susanne tonight. I'll let her introduce you to Susanne.
Thanks, Meg. Welcome again tonight to a book talk for Launching While Female, Smashing the System That Holds Women Entrepreneurs Back. This exciting new book is an investigation of the obstacles women and non-binary entrepreneurs face when launching, funding, and growing their companies. Obstacles that still persist because the current startup world was engineered by and for white men. This expose of the gender gap in entrepreneurship is also a roadmap for a more inclusive and economically successful future for us all. Our guest tonight is the book's author and proud Somerville resident, as you heard, Susanne Althoff. Susanne's an assistant professor of publishing at Emerson College in Boston. Before she was a professor, she had a 2-decade career as a magazine editor. Her last post was at the Boston Globe magazine, where we were colleagues for 3 years. Susanne's book, Launching While Female, Smashing the System That Holds Women Entrepreneurs Back, was released yesterday, and it's available at the library, and signed copies are available for purchase at Porter Square Books. Links for both will be available in tonight's Zoom chat feature. So thanks for joining us, Susanne.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thanks for that introduction. Thank you to the Somerville Library for hosting me. I'm thrilled that you're doing this, and thank you everyone for attending. I see so many familiar names. Sort of like takes me back to my history to see so many of these different names. Thank you.
So the way that tonight will work is Susanne will walk us through some of the research and exciting finds that she found during writing her book. And if you have any questions, you can pop them into the Zoom chat feature. If they are relevant to the topic at hand, we may answer them as we go along, but we'll also reserve some time at the end of the discussion to go over any questions that you might have. Sound cool? Cool. Just starting off, this is such a massive topic and so important, especially right now. So Susanne, can you tell us about what drew you to the topic of entrepreneurship's gender gap?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. So you mentioned that I previously worked at the Boston Globe. While I was at the Boston Globe, I participated in several product launches. And through that experience, I absolutely fell in love with the entrepreneurial process. Identifying an unmet need, researching the potential market, all of it. And then when I became a professor, I started mentoring students who were starting their own companies while they were still in school. And it just happened that everyone that I was mentoring was a woman. And as they came into my office and we had meetings, they told me stories of investors and other people who were not taking them seriously, not taking their business ideas seriously, or were belittling their ideas. So while I heard these stories, I knew about the statistics that show a gender gap in entrepreneurship. So what this means is women launch fewer companies than men. Their companies overall have less access to startup capital. They make less revenue, and they also employ fewer people. The statistics also tell us that women-founded startups receive less than 3% of the venture capital investment in this country each year. So that's less than 3%. And women who are Black or Latinx receive even a smaller slice of that pie. So like so many people, I found that data really frustrating. But I knew that there are entrepreneurs who are women and non-binary people who create amazingly successful companies. With all of that, I wanted to use my journalism skills to collect the stories of women and non-binary entrepreneurs, and to hear from them directly what they wished was different about the entrepreneurial space and what could fix the gender gap.
And just speaking of that, the book has such a tremendous amount of research in it, both historical and academic, but you spoke to so many people. You picked 100 women and non-binary entrepreneurs to interview for the piece. How did you decide who to talk to, and how long did that take?
Yeah, the book took 4 years from beginning to end. Yeah. I looked for people. I looked for people who had visions of going beyond being a small business owner. I was looking for people who are really trying to grow their company into something sizable, or already achieved that. And then in some cases, people who had sold their companies. And I knew I wanted to include as many industries as possible. So, obviously there's tech in the book, because that's what we most often associate with entrepreneurship, but I also looked at the finance industry and food and fashion and medicine and healthcare and finance. So yeah, a lot. And then I knew also that I wanted to reach entrepreneurs all over the country. Certainly Boston is known for its startup activity. And I did talk to a lot of people in Boston at Kendall Square. But I went, and Silicon Valley and New York are also, of course, known for entrepreneurial activity, but I went way beyond that. So, Texas, Florida, Atlanta, I reached all over the country.
Did you have anyone who is maybe like the most memorable?
Yeah, it's a question like choosing your favorite child. So this has local relevance. I felt really fortunate to be able to interview Robin Chase. But many of you probably recognize her name. She's the co-founder of Zipcar. So it was wonderful to talk to her, both because her company was so successful. She has sold it since in the meantime, but she's so well known in our local business circles. I knew that when she founded Zipcar 20 years ago, I knew that media reports at the time often had headlines that referred to Robin Chase and her co-founder, and they would say things like, this Zipcar founded by 2 moms. And, so here Robin Chase has an MBA. She has incredible business experience. She co-founded it with a woman who has a PhD, but yet in media reports, they were presented as 2 moms. And so I asked Robin about this, and she said it absolutely drove her out of her mind to see Zipcar presented in this way. It's what I learned is it's actually quite common for people to obsess over the parental status of women entrepreneurs. Some people even use the term mompreneur, which I find really problematic. And you don't hear dadpreneur, right? That's like just nothing, that's something we don't say. And I think, this gets back to, I think in our culture, we so often focus on the parenting status of women, especially women in politics. We've heard that lately, these questions of, do you have children and who's watching them? So Robin Chase was an honor to interview, and I'll give one more example, which also has local relevance. I was really fortunate to interview Lillian Lambert. She received her MBA from Harvard Business School in 1969, and she was the first Black woman to receive an MBA from Harvard Business School. Women were not granted full access to the MBA program, and it didn't happen until 1963. Miss Lambert, let's see, in 1975, she launched a janitorial services company. And when she eventually sold it in 2001, it was making 20 million in annual sales, and she was employing over 1,000 people. So she's really a giant in the entrepreneurial space.
Yeah, I loved you open a chapter with her, and it's so vivid and so amazing. And it's such an incredible story. And I think that one of the most astonishing things about the book is really hearing a lot of the data, but also seeing the specific anecdotes and stories that these women have. Did you find that, what were the biggest hurdles that you found that women and non-binary entrepreneurs faced?
Yeah, for sure, the biggest is the lack of money that people need to start their company. So I already mentioned the small figure for venture capital investment, which is less than 3%. But only some companies are suitable for venture capital investment. But even with there are disparities with business loans, the racial wealth gap that we have in our country limits the amount of funds that entrepreneurs of color have access to start a company. And then the gender pay gap limits the amount of funds that a lot of women have to launch their company. Researchers at Northeastern have done a study. They've connected having student loan debt to your chances of opening a company. And they found the more debt that you have, this lowers your chances of starting a company. And if you eventually do start a company, your business income is reduced. And so this is significant because women end up having more student debt than men, and they take longer to pay it off. And Black women have the most student debt of all. So this lack of money that you need to start a company and grow a company is a huge hurdle. I also, while researching, I heard over and over again stories from women and non-binary entrepreneurs about microaggressions. Their expertise question, people asking them, do you really understand computer science? Like the students I mentioned earlier that I mentored, I heard over and over again, people having their business ideas dismissed. They also told me that they struggle to find mentors and role models, especially ones who share their gender or their race. The women I interviewed talked about struggling with confidence and feeling imposter syndrome. And then also, unfortunately, there were cases of sexual harassment and assault. This is coming from investors, from bankers, from customers, and other sources. So that there are, unfortunately, are a fair number of hurdles that these entrepreneurs are facing.
Yeah, it's tremendous. And also, it is also, I find that you have done a very amazing job of sort of connecting the dots as to, why entrepreneurs' gender gap is important to people who aren't entrepreneurs themselves. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping that the book is of interest to everyone, because I feel really passionately that this is something that we should all be concerned about. Our economy is weaker than it should be, before the pandemic and now, because we don't have full participation in the entrepreneurial space. We're missing out on job creation for sure. Researchers have estimated that if women launched growth-oriented startups at the same rate as men, we'd have 15 million additional jobs in this country in 2 years. So we're missing out on jobs. We're also missing out on innovation. It's very common for entrepreneurs to create a business that solves an unmet need that they have personally experienced or that they're seeing in their community. And so for this reason, we want to have entrepreneurs who have different experiences and different backgrounds and different points of view.
Sure. We have someone in the comments that's saying, as someone who worked in high tech for a long time, I think the gender promotion gap is even a bigger issue than the pay gap, which is also problematic. Did you find that as well?
Absolutely, yes. And it's interesting, a lot of women end up starting their own companies because they're struggling to advance as an employee. This was, you mentioned briefly that I look at the history as well. This was something that I didn't realize before, that the term the glass ceiling has a connection to women's entrepreneurship. This is a term that really started being used in the 1980s to describe women being unable to advance to the most senior levels in a company. And when it was first being introduced in the 1980s, a lot of media reports talked about this glass ceiling, and that as a result, women were starting their own companies because they thought that's the only way I can be a CEO. So yes, to that person's question, absolutely.
Just you touched briefly on sort of the situation that we're in the pandemic. You wrote the book pre-COVID. Currently, women are largely bearing the brunt of the economic fallout of the pandemic. More women are losing their jobs, they're dropping out so they can do more remote learning for their kids. What kind of impact is the pandemic having on women entrepreneurs? And my new least favorite word, momtrepreneurs.
Thank you, Rachel. It's not good. As you're saying, the women are shouldering a really large burden during the pandemic. There was one report that came out not too long ago that it looks like the levels of venture capital funding are dropping even more than they were. So they're even lower than they were before the pandemic. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce just did a report. They did a poll and they found that the pandemic has taken a heavier economic toll on women-owned small businesses than those owned by men. And women's firms anticipate a slower, weaker recovery than firms owned by men. Of course, if we're going to experience an economic recovery in this country, we need to support women entrepreneurs, non-binary entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs of color. That's how we're going to have a chance at recovery.
Just quickly going back, I know that you mentioned the history of the glass ceiling, but you go back even further than that in the book. You look all the way back to the colonial era. Can you tell us some of what things did you learn about that time? What was the most surprising things?
Yeah, this was research I really enjoyed. And actually, this was research that the Somerville Library really helped me achieve. Thank goodness for the Minuteman Library Network, which I got books from all over. So my research turned up again and again examples of the ways that male supremacy and white supremacy have been baked into our business world. So one example I'll give, there's the common law doctrine called coverture. So what this means is when a woman married, her legal rights and her legal obligations were taken over by her husband. So this is why women took their husband's name. And what this means for business is married women were unable to make contracts and were unable to own their own businesses. Coverture was in place from the colonial period to the mid-19th century. There was one economist that I cite in the book. She discovered that when legal reforms replaced coverture in certain US states, that the number of women applying for patents for their inventions jumped significantly. So there's this link of this common law doctrine suppressing invention activity in women. So there are ideas of the pursuits that were suitable for women. They persisted for a long time, and I think we all see evidence of them persisting today. The one other example that I thought was really fascinating, it wasn't until the early 1970s that the help wanted sections of newspapers, and including the Boston Globe, it wasn't until the 1970s that these newspapers no longer had sections, one section help wanted female and another section help wanted male. And of course, our help wanted sections were also divided by race. So again, this is there were hurdles in place that made it difficult for women to open companies. But I do cite examples in the book of women who were able to push through and open businesses. P.S. There's lots of biographies in the Somerville Library to read about this.
It's very, very cool. It is so fascinating to learn sort of the roots of everything and how we got so tangled and how we got here in the first place. Just sort of on a more local level, how would you assess today's ecosystem in this area, this Somerville, Cambridge, Boston, in terms of supporting women and non-binary people who have launched their own companies or are thinking about it?
Yeah. So I mentioned that Boston is truly one of the world's most significant startup ecosystems. And we are fortunate that we have a lot of programs in Somerville and Cambridge and Boston that support people who have ambitions to start a business, especially women entrepreneurs and non-binary entrepreneurs. For example, there's a nonprofit called the Capital Network, which offers programming. Babson College offers programming. You don't have to be a Babson College student to take advantage of that. There's Venture Cafe in Cambridge and in Kendall Square, which has free networking options and advice. So the advice and support exists in our community for sure. But the funding picture here locally is just as problematic as it is in other parts of the country, that people are again and again saying, I don't have the access to the money that I need.
Well, also on a national level, several politicians have proposed programs to support underrepresented entrepreneurs. For example, Senators Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren have called for helping Black entrepreneurs with student loan relief and business grants. Are these programs really needed? What is so great about them in a good way?
Yeah, I find the programs that are specifically attacking student debt to be really promising, because as I mentioned earlier, that the link that researchers are seeing between having student debt and being less likely to start a business. I mentioned that women have more college debt than men. So these student loan programs could especially help women entrepreneurs of color. I would also mention that Senator Elizabeth Warren has specifically connected the dots to past government policies and past government neglect that have contributed to the racial wealth gap. So she's referring to things like redlining or the GI Bill. So there's this history of the government contributing to situations which today make it harder for underrepresented entrepreneurs. So, and I agree with her position that we should be looking at things like grants for, she has one program in particular when she was running for president, of grants for Black entrepreneurs. I think this is really powerful, and it will lead to jobs and an economic recovery for us.
So what would you say is the most urgently needed support in underrepresented entrepreneurs? There's anything that we can do, and everyone who's listening tonight, to help tonight?
Absolutely, there's a lot. So I mentioned funding several times. That we need really creative loan programs, grant programs. There's crowdfunding programs, and crowdfunding is available to all of us. There's a lot of research that says that we need more diverse venture capitalists and more diverse angel investors. It's very typical for investors to invest in companies founded by people who remind them of themselves, or they went to school with them, or they are in their network. So if you have more diverse investors, you have more diverse entrepreneurs. Individually, there's so much that we can do. I mean, a lot of people talk about Main Street businesses and shopping your values, and this is really important. But you can ask, who is the owner of this company? Who founded this company? I'll name two organizations that help you do this, but there are many. One that I really like is a nonprofit in Atlanta called Buy from a Black Woman. If you Google this, it's very easy to find, and they have a directory where you can find companies. So let's say I was just looking for notepads, and I found a company that was selling notepads. There's also a group called the F Project, F for female. Again, easily found online. This will also show you companies that are women-owned, women-operated. And this I really like. Earlier this year, Yelp added a feature. I'm sure many of you, or all of you, know Yelp, the user reviews. Yelp added a feature where you can search for women-owned businesses. So there's, being a little bit more deliberate with some of our purchasing decisions is one of many ways to support underrepresented entrepreneurs.
So we have something that just came in that says we need more mentoring for female entrepreneurs for products, not just services. And you talk quite a bit about mentorship and sort of the challenges there. Could you speak to that? Sort of, what does mentorship look like in these entrepreneurship circles?
Yeah, yes, that's a great question. And actually maybe that I could add to my wish list of things that people should be thinking about or doing. If you have skills that you could become a mentor in some fashion, there is over and over again, the women and non-binary entrepreneurs that I interviewed reported that they struggle to find mentors, especially mentors who share their gender or race, but even any mentor. Entrepreneurs should have a huge circle of mentors, and even more important, sponsors. Sponsors are sort of a more active version of mentors. A sponsor will really vouch for your idea, will make phone calls, will really sort of act as your advocate. There's interesting data that's coming out since the Me Too movement that there's been a chilling effect as a result of the Me Too movement, that a lot of men are saying that they are reluctant to mentor women, or they're reluctant to have close personal work relationships with women. And this is problematic for women entrepreneurs, because so many of the people who would be potential mentors because they are, let's say, a business school professor, or because they're a CEO or a senior executive, so many people in those ranks are men. So when they are reluctant to mentor women, this is how it contributes to a shortage of mentors.
I think in the book you call it the Mike Pence effect, which is quite funny.
Yes, a lot of people talk about Mike Pence famously said that he's not going to share a meal with anyone other than any woman who's not his wife. Yes, so I mean, there have been stories in the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg where some executives are saying, I won't be in a closed office with a female colleague, or I won't go on a business trip with a woman colleague. So, what this means is she is iced out of all of these opportunities to network, to find her next funding source, to get a good idea for a business.
So sort of, I guess, on the flip side of things where connections are thriving, it says that you visited a few entrepreneurship clubs for young kids. Do you think that these activities are really making a difference?
I do. So one program in particular that was so memorable, in 2018, I traveled to Atlanta. Outside of Atlanta, there's a group called Inspiring Greatness in You, and they teach young girls about three things. They teach them entrepreneurship, STEM, and then golf. And at first I was like, golf? How does that work? And so their philosophy for golf is that this will, when the girls become older, this will help them with networking, because so many introductions happen on the golf course, or deals that are made on the golf course. And then, so of course, entrepreneurship and STEM, they are trying to expose them to new to job options, to career options. And there are a lot of programs like this one that I'm describing in Atlanta. And so they're all built on the philosophy that you can't be what you can't see. So if children growing up don't see people who look like them and who sound like them and who move like them, if they don't see these people doing certain kinds of jobs, then it's harder for them to have aspirations to have this job when you grow up. When there's really interesting data that when researchers ask children and also ask adults, what do you think of when you think entrepreneur? And almost always the answer is a man, and especially a white man. And this is I had met a researcher who does a lot of entrepreneurship training in Saudi Arabia, and she says even her students in Saudi Arabia, when she asks them to name, who's an entrepreneur, they all name white American men. And so she brings up the point that, who is self-selecting out when they think that they don't fit the pattern or the mold of who an entrepreneur should be.
And I remember quite vividly that you touch on that a lot with adult women and non-binary entrepreneurs, where they're not seeing people who look like them. And I particularly remember you talking about that Forbes list.
Absolutely, yes. So this Forbes list came out was it a year ago, Rachel? Forbes had a list of the 100 most innovative business minds, and there was one woman on the list. And this happens over and over again, where it's this message, this current, that it's a space for certain people and not for others. There was a pregnant CEO on the cover of Inc. magazine about a year ago, a woman CEO, and it was the first visibly pregnant CEO on the cover of a business magazine ever. And I'm like, how can that be? But yeah, there's so many milestones we have not yet hit in terms of featuring entrepreneurs that are different.
I remember that cover as well. It's Audrey Gelman from The Wing, and that was so shocking that it happened to be the first. So since it's quite sad that we can't all gather tonight and celebrate in person, but I'm sure especially locals would love to know if you did any of your writing and research in the Somerville Library.
I did, as I mentioned, I did a ton of research with books. Actually, my favorite writing space in Somerville/Medford is the Tufts Library. So this was pre-pandemic. Those of you who haven't explored the Tufts Library yet, it's open to neighbors, and it has great writing spaces.
That's so great. So we're going to turn to questions in just a moment. So if you have anything that you would like to add, you can put it in the chat box and I will pull them up as we go along. Did anyone hear anything I just said? So we'll be moving on to questions in just a moment. If you have questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll go through them. Susanne, there are lots of things for you in here. So one of the questions is, thank you for writing the book. I'm a female entrepreneur and dealing with bias from SCORE, which is all capitals.
I know this, yeah. Keep going.
Most of the entrepreneur support is for women to start small service businesses. I'm currently putting together a product launch, a physical product, and the support is just not there. How can we address this? What is SCORE?
Yes, SCORE. Oh, it's an acronym, and it's escaping me. Someone is maybe going to drop this in the chat. SCORE is a volunteer organization of retired executives that help people who have aspirations of starting their own company. So you can probably imagine who is typically today in 2020 a retired CEO or a retired business owner. It skews older men. And older white men. And so these volunteers are doing an amazing job, and I really applaud their volunteer efforts, but I have heard reports that, that there are some underrepresented entrepreneurs who feel like they can't make an appropriate connection. If this person hasn't yet explored the Venture Cafe in Kendall Square, they have free office hours. Well, they had them in person. I'm not 100% sure how it looks virtually, but you drop in on a Thursday afternoon and you have lots of different people with different areas of expertise that you can ask legal questions, marketing questions, prototype questions. Yeah, I mean, finding the right mentor fit can be a challenge.
So one more question. When you spoke to women who launched companies, did you find that they did more or less, or they did more with less? I'm generalizing here, but I've seen a lot of companies led by men that underperform despite the investment they receive. I do like that you talk about that juice company in particular in the book. They grow too fast, they move on to the next thing. Again, I'm generalizing, but this is a question. I just wonder how women have used what they do get and whether it influences their success, and also how they get second chances the way men do with more funding. Yeah.
So there can be advantages to how can I put this? I mean, having startup capital makes everything easier for sure, and allows you to hire employees. But that said, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of underrepresented entrepreneurs, especially who can prove that they can make certain decisions with a very sort of they can create a nimble company and prove that they can, to use that phrasing, do more with less. Taking advantage of crowdfunding campaigns, for example, Kickstarter. Kickstarter is used by people who don't have a lot of other funding options. And a benefit of Kickstarter is that you are doing marketing at the same time that you are raising money. It is, of course, small amounts that you're raising. It's interesting, in the funding picture, there's only one type of funding where women see superior results than men, and that is in crowdfunding. And there's a lot of theories about why that's happening. Crowdfunding is, of course, just ordinary people giving money and making, $1 investments, $20 investments. And there's some thinking that they have fewer biases that are in play there. So Rachel, there was something else that you said about, did I answer all of that question?
So just sort of this idea of male entrepreneurs typically receiving additional funding when they've experienced failures or losses.
Thank you. Yes. So yeah, I mean, I think that one angel investor I spoke to put it in a really interesting way. She said, it's a myth that there's capital scarcity, that there's not enough money to go around. It's some companies are getting more money than they should, right? And we've heard of examples like WeWork and others where investors probably were not making the wisest decisions. There are some examples. Fortune always publishes lists of how much funding is given out to women entrepreneurs each year, and it's often less than a company like WeWork. One year it was less than all of the money invested in Juul, the electronic cigarette. More money was invested in Juul than in all women founded companies that year. There's one really memorable interview for the book. A woman I met in 2018, she was pursuing an education startup. And to me, it was a fabulous idea. It was, she had customers, she had a great idea. She was featured in Forbes at one point. She won awards. It seemed like a company that should succeed. When I checked back in with her in February of this year, she was just about to close down the company. And she said she had only raised $43,000 in funding. And she just, she had like maxed out every credit card. She just couldn't keep going. In this particular example, it was a Black woman, and Black women have received the smallest amount of external funding. It's a very problematic situation.
I actually had pulled out some of my favorite segments of the book, and that was one of the things that did come up where it says Finney and her team could identify only 34 Black women entrepreneurs and 58 Latinx women entrepreneurs who by the end of 2017 had raised at least 1 million in venture funding, not in 1 year, but for all time. And that is so astounding and so upsetting.
Absolutely.
So we have a few more questions. And again, if you still have questions, please add them to the chat box. We'll hopefully get through as many as we can. So the top employment lawyer, female, for a large high-tech company recently told me that women are only promoted, quote, for the optics. So STEM can really be a dead end. I noticed that banking seems to offer more momentum. More of a statement. And then
I mean, but that's an interesting. Can I jump in, Rachel, and address that? There's a lot of good research that says you should not start a company just out of high school or just out of college. That you should go get a job, work, accumulate experience, learn an industry, see the pain points, see the unmet needs, and then you strike out on your own and use all that you learned to start your new company. For that to work in its ideal state, you have accumulated some management experience along the way in the company that you've worked for. You know how to set agendas, you know how to set strategic goals, you know how to manage large budgets, hopefully a budget of at least $1 million. So if you are in your work experience, if you are held back from promotions, if you don't have experience hiring people, managing people, that's certainly going to come into play when you start your own company if you're missing those skills.
So speaking of starting your own company, we have a fun question. Does Susanne have any aspirations for leading a business or organization now that she's done this work?
Oh gosh, no, I don't. I have so much admiration for the people who do this. It's not my skill set. I will happily spend my money with these companies, but no. Although I still am mentoring students, and especially students who might be interested in media startups because of my media background. That is really exciting for me.
So another question is and I also had this as well. It's what is the smashing that is referred to in the title?
Okay, good question, yes. There is a lot of great advice out in the world and great books that speak directly to women entrepreneurs and tell them, push harder, pitch better, do better, just, sleep less. And that's how you will get ahead. And that's how you will build a successful company. And that is important advice. But we just can't keep asking women to lean in harder and to do better. There are things that all of us need to collectively agree on, that there are hurdles that exist, and we need to collectively agree on that we're all going to work together. And so that's what I want to smash. I want to smash the broken funding system we have. I want to smash the way that we have so many people accumulating student debt, which delays or prevents them from starting a business. I want us to address microaggressions. So I really want us all to become, I hope, passionate about this and see that this is going to help all of us when this systematic bias and these systematic hurdles are smashed. That's a great question. Thank you.
So one more is, what research questions are still unanswered when it comes to minority women in entrepreneurship? There's questions about the role of mentors and role models, how important it is to have a mentor or role model who shares qualities with you. A lot of research has been done on funding already. Like, for example, there was one fascinating study where the researchers hired actors and had the actors of different races and different genders read this exact same business pitch, and then measured investors' reactions to it. And the pitches pitched by men were received more strongly and more favorably. And I should also note, this is not just male investors who have these biases. Women investors as well have shown that they prefer companies, they can prefer companies led by men. And I think this, if you think about women voters sometimes as well, there are women voters who say, I prefer male politicians. So we all harbor these ideas of who we expect to fill certain roles, and if we're not conscious of it, it affects our decision making and our preferences. Oof, that is a lot. And so we have another one that is, I'm curious how the issues you have explored impact non-binary entrepreneurs in particular.
Yes, this is great. A great question, an important question. So I mentioned a little while ago that there are programs that support women entrepreneurs, like there's networking events or accelerator programs or funding programs. There's a lot of positives here, but some of these programs do not deliberately include non-binary entrepreneurs. And so I spoke to non-binary entrepreneurs who said, I don't know where I fit in some of these networking events and some of these educational opportunities. One said to me, I just show up and I just assume it's a space for me. So and also I would also add a lot of efforts that help lift up women, whether women in the workplace or women entrepreneurs. Some of them fall into, or many fall into, a trap that they help white women only. So I think all of us, when we think about efforts that we are participating in or helping to build, that they are truly inclusive, and that we are careful with our language about can we also include gender expansive entrepreneurs? Can we make sure that we are not just building programs that help white women?
Sure, for sure. So another question is, and we will start wrapping quite soon. So if you have any other questions, please get them in now. How do women and non-binary entrepreneurs attract seed funding when venture capital firms who pride themselves in being the first check are so often supporting white male-led startups?
Yeah, there's interesting research going on with angel investing. Angel investing is individuals, high income individuals who are making their own investments into companies, sometimes purely on their own, sometimes acting with a group. The angel investing population is becoming more diverse. More angel investors of color, more women angel investors. And this is a promising development. There's interesting data on shifts in wealth. Women will be accumulating more wealth in the coming years because of their work habits, because of longevity, because of inheritance. So there are groups, there's groups like Pipeline Angels and Astia Angels that are working to train more angel investors. So often these can be a promising first place to go for funding.
Great, great. So did any of your interviewees, one more. So what have you learned about the role of self-empowerment or self-leadership among minority women entrepreneurs?
There are several programs that are specifically designed for women entrepreneurs of color. Like there's one in particular called Digital Undivided, which is, its programs are for women entrepreneurs who are Black or Latinx. And they teach you everything you would expect to be taught in an entrepreneurial program: how to pitch, how to legal terms, how to put contracts together. But because they are specifically speaking to women entrepreneurs who are Black and Latinx, they have special advice and instruction about microaggressions. They prepare these people for, you're going to be in a meeting with an investor and your expertise in computer science may be questioned, or your expertise in finance may be questioned. And this is how to quickly address that question and then bring the conversation back to the amazing work that your company does and how it's growing. So some of these organizations give you specific tactics to use.
Those are very handy tactics for everyday life as well. So did any of your interviewees who are parents cite the challenges of balancing launching a business with parenting responsibilities? And were partners supportive and enabling?
Yes, there's interesting research on this subject, and I saw it with the people that I interviewed, that having a partner is very important if you are going on the entrepreneurial path. I mean, on anyone who does a startup of any gender is looking at a lot of late nights, a lot of missed bedtimes. So having a supportive partner is important. This is a partner who is going to do the grocery shopping. There was research, I think it was out of the Midwest, that looked at men entrepreneurs more frequently have the support of their wives in heterosexual marriages than women entrepreneurs have the support of their men. And they made a connection between the potential for their companies to grow. Those who had more spousal support saw companies grow faster. There was a headline in Harvard Business Review. This was talking to working people, not entrepreneurs, but it said if you can't find a supportive spouse, it's better to be single, which is a really sad way of looking at that problem, but there it is. Childcare, I mean, especially during the pandemic, I see this personally. If you cannot have a public school system that is taking children from 8:10 to 2:35 p.m. the way Somerville Public Schools normally do. That's hard.
So just we'll take this one last question and then we'll wrap up. But do you have any advice for women seeking mentors? What should an aspiring entrepreneur or aspiring anything do to make this happen for them?
Yeah, this was a question I asked a lot of the people that I interviewed. They said if you have a very specific question, and if you can start, it can sometimes even just be cold emailing people, but if you can cold email them with, I need to figure out the answer to the X very specific question, and I see on your LinkedIn profile that you have experience in this. Could we have a 15-minute phone chat? They found that that was the most effective way to get someone's attention. What it's pretty universally agreed upon that you should not call someone up and say, can you be my mentor? Because that's maybe even creepy and not effective. So start with the small targeted questions and ask a lot of people. And eventually you'll find the person who's most receptive to your questions, and maybe you could want to build that into something bigger, a bigger relationship.
Oh, that's great. Well, Susanne, I think we'll wrap up, but you have lots of praise happening in the chat right now, so I hope you get to take a look. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you so much, Susanne. Congratulations on your book. It's wonderful. I hope everyone gets a chance to read it very soon. Thank you to the Somerville Public Library and Porter Square Books. Launching While Female is available to borrow or for purchase through the links that'll be in the chat feature. And you can learn more about the book and find resources for entrepreneurs on Susanne's website, which is SUSANNEALTHOFF.com, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. Susanne, do you have any final words?
Rachel, thank you so much for doing this tonight. You were fabulous, and I love that you are now at Emerson teaching aspiring magazine writers. Thank you to the Somerville Library for hosting me. I love the way you support Somerville authors, and thank you. I see so many familiar names and faces on this Zoom call, and it's so meaningful that you came out tonight, or I guess you didn't come out, but you turned on your laptop tonight, and that means the world to me. So thank you very much.